to talk about what we've been doing and what we will do. The Anglican Communion is very good at acronyms. We have acronyms for everything. And we surpass ourselves when it comes to IASCFO. We have 7 letters in our name. When I first came across it, I thought this was the Anglican Communion's Commission on Unidentified Flying Objects. That we were going to spend all our time thinking about aliens from outer space. But I soon realized this was not the case. We are the Inter-Anglican Standing Commission on Unity, Faith and Order. Now, some of you will know IASCFO from before. If you've been to many ACCs in the past, if you know the world of the Global Communion, you may know of the work of IASCFO. But just in case one or two people here don't know that, just a few words about what our task is. And I am the chair of IASCFO. I've been that for the last couple of years. So to give a formal definition of what we are, it says IASCFO is a permanent commission of the Anglican Communion. So we're not occasional. We don't just exist for a short period of time and then disappear. We are a permanent commission, and we report to the ACC. And that's exactly what we're doing this afternoon. So we are fulfilling our duty to report to the ACC. And its brief is to advise the instruments of communion and the member churches on matters of doctrine, ecclesiology, liturgy, canon law, and ecumenical relations. So that's, if you like, our formal brief. And to break that down, we essentially have 2 tasks, and we actually come together, as we'll explain a little bit later on. We were formed out of 2 strands of work that was done in the Anglican Communion before. Broadly speaking, one was unity, ecumenical relations, how we relate to other churches across the world, and theology, how we understand our own doctrinal, theological commitments as an Anglican Communion. So we do those 2 things. On the one hand, as IASCFO, we, if you like, oversee and keep an eye on all the different ecumenical dialogues between the global Anglican Communion and other churches around the world, whether it's the Roman Catholics or the Lutherans or the Orthodox or the Oriental Orthodox or the Pentecostals or whoever that may be. And our role is not to do those dialogues. We have separate groups within the Anglican Communion who meet with representatives of other communions and other churches. But our job is to make sure that we're saying the same thing to everybody. And so all the reports of the different dialogues come to us, and we kind of monitor them to make sure we're saying the same things to the Catholics as we're saying to the Baptists or the Pentecostals and so on, so we're not giving mixed messages all over the place. So that's the ecumenical task of what we do. But the other side of what we do is that work of faith and order. Thinking about our own order as an Anglican Communion, our own faith, the nature of that faith. And so sometimes when provinces come up with an idea, they want some advice on it, or the instruments of communion ask us for advice, we seek to give those as well. And so over the next couple of days, we'll be reporting on what we have done and what we are intending to do, or at least hoping to do. Sit down. Okay, that's fine. Sorry about that. Thank you. We will be trying to report. So today, we are focusing on our Inter-Anglican relations. That's what we'll be thinking about in this session, about our relations amongst one another, which, as you know, are sometimes a little tricky right now. After coffee, we will be looking at some of the groups that, again, report to IASCFO, in particular, the group that looks at Anglican canon law, and also the Liturgical Commission looking at developments in worship. And then again on Thursday is the time when we will report on the various ecumenical dialogues that have been going on over recent years, and a number of people will present on those dialogues at that time. And members of the ACC can find hyperlinks to all the pieces of work related to IASCFO on the ACC website, on the micro link there. So you can find the reports, and in particular our report to the ACC, which you should have there, which hopefully some of you will have read. So that's a little introduction to who we are and what we do. First of all, this afternoon, I want to we want to introduce to you two texts that we have been working on over recent years, and to explain where they came from, what they are, and to commend them to you as part of our work. And so I'm going to hand on to the Director of Interfaith and Order, Christopher Wells, who is going to introduce the first of those texts.
Hello, friends. Nice to be with you all. We get to talk about ecclesiology right after lunch. Isn't that exciting? It is, exactly. There's actually a slideshow of photos if you want to go back, just for the fun of it, while I'm speaking, or maybe that's distracting. I've been in my job for 3 months, so it's wonderful to be with you all here at the beginning. And Bishop Graham's description there of our sort of ecumenical work and then the Inter-Anglican work fitting together is, I think, one of the most interesting things about this discussion. Sometimes when we have trouble getting along with one another as Anglicans, we nonetheless are continuing with ecumenical discussions with other Christians. And we remember who we are, or we speak about our faith and our order with other Christians. And then we come back and we realize that as Anglicans, we have a tradition of speaking about our own faith and order with each other as well. I do think in that sense, the life and call and work of the Anglican Communion today is really ecumenical, you could say. If you're asking yourself, what is our ecclesiology? I would propose to you that it's ecumenical. Now, one proof of that, I teach theology like Graham, and I'm a nerd, so I have to say something historical. At the Lambeth Conference 1920, the Anglican Communion committed itself to the ecumenical was that the Holy Spirit recommending Christian unity to us? At the Lambeth Conference 1920, the Anglican Communion committed itself to the quest for visible Christian unity with all Christians. And if you look back at what they said there, it feels very contemporary, I would say. They say our call is to communion with one another and with other Christians, and we want to be more than a mere federation. But they said we're not exactly sure what that means or how to do it. In many ways, we're having the exact same discussion now. Every Lambeth conference since 1920 has reiterated the commitment to full visible unity, and many ACCs have committed to that same phrase, full visible unity, with other Christians and certainly with one another. Again, not easy work, but important gospel work. And our main focus for this session, as Graham said, is going to be the Inter-Anglican discussion on the theory that speaking with one another, making sure we're listening to one another and finding space for one another, and that's a critical part. And is there a time sometimes to give extra attention to the space question so that we know that there's room for everyone in the communion? So we'll make the case for that project to you in a minute, but we wanted to give that enough time in this session, so that's the main thing. I simply want to commend to you, this is my last point, if you could go to the slide of this. Back. There you go. This is the book, God So Loved the World. It was filed for this ACC, and we do have a resolution commending it. Our office has been so productive, including during COVID, that there were really more texts than we could unfold in the ACC. I just want to commend this to you. I had no part in writing it whatsoever, but it's papers 3 and 4 from IASCFO, and as you can see, it's a paper on theological anthropology and a paper on salvation. I would call this just good, basic Christian doctrine. It's edifying, it's beautiful, it's scriptural, it's sacramental. And if you didn't get a chance to read the text beforehand, but you're thinking about anthropology or what is salvation, I would just simply recommend and commend the text to you. And we will be taking up that resolution later. An example, I think, of Anglicans coming together across the communion and doing beautiful theological work together. And really with that, I would like to pass it back to Graham, and he will introduce our friend from Kenya, Paul Korir, the Bishop of Kapsabet. I'm sort of introducing him now, but I have great affection for these people because IASCFO spent an amazing week together in Kenya in December, being hosted there, and Paul is our Kenyan member. And we just had wonderful, deep, honest, beautiful conversations with one another, which we want to share with you now. Thank you.
In fact, before we introduce Bishop Paul, we have one more report that we are going to commend to you, which Neil Vigers on the ACO staff is going to commend as well.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm here to talk to you about a brand new publication. It's called Anglican Communion, Unity, Faith and Order, 2008 to 2023. As Anglicans, we can be immensely proud of the role we've played over the decades in faith and order. We've led the way very often in the drive towards Christian unity. It's been a passion, an imperative, and we've done an enormous amount of good theological and ecumenical work. The ACC and the Anglican Communion have invested an enormous amount of time, of energy, and a colossal amount of money. And we continue to pour money from the ACC funds into faith and order work because it's part of the constitutional mandate of the ACC. And more importantly, as Anglicans, we believe that God calls us to unity. Thank you. So what we've tried to do in this publication is draw together the immense amount of work that has been done in faith and order, ecumenical theology, ethics, liturgy, canon law. All these things that comprise the shape and the form of our unity as Anglicans and our unity in Christ with all the other churches of the world who make up the worldwide body of Christ. One of the best ways to learn who we are as Anglicans is to read the ecumenical agreed statements, because there we find not just a description of our partners in dialogue, but also of ourselves. So it's a deep and rich resource for all Anglicans to enjoy. But there's a problem, which is the loss of memory with the passing of the years. Membership of bodies changes very fast. Things that were well known, even the Anglican Communion Covenant, rapidly become forgotten, and people have never heard of these things. So IASCFO has created something that harvests an immense amount of work into one place. It's not a book, it's a living electronic text. It's full of hyperlinks, and it means you don't have to go searching on a website and all sorts of odd corners to find a summary of Anglican faith and order life. It's all there in one place. And on the microsite, you'll find very easily this publication. It can also be kept up to date very easily. So once the Phase 3 part of Lambeth has issued the calls, we will add the calls to this book. So it's of use to our ecumenical partners if they want to know, what do Anglicans think and believe? What do they do in doctrine, in liturgy, in canon law? It's all there in one place. For your colleges, for your seminaries, bishops in your diocese, parish clergy, laity who have a passion for Christian unity, this resource is easy to use. It's packed with essential information, and it means that memories will not be so likely to get lost and overlooked. So IASCFO offers this this book to you. There's a draft resolution. I hope you can see that on the screen. Just there. We'll come back to that at a later time. We commend this book to you with gratitude and with hope, hoping and praying that it will enrich our common life. Thank you.
Thank you, Christopher and Neil. We're going to come on to the main item of our business this afternoon for this particular session, which is one on which we really want your wisdom. And that is a project that emerged from our discussions when we gathered together in December in Kenya a little while ago. And we want to present this piece of work that we are hoping to do or offering to do for your advice, wisdom, and direction as we do that. So I'm going to invite my colleague and friend, Bishop Paul Korea from Bishop of Kapsabet in Kenya. And we're going to do this as a kind of dialogue, a little conversation, if you like, between us as we take this forward. So does this thing work? Does that work? Do we have a microphone, this one? Are we able to turn it on? Okay. There it is, good. Good. So what we're going to do is we're going to present this project to you. We're going to then give you time to discuss it around your tables with some questions on the screen. And then we'll have some time for plenary, for discussion, and for feedback on your thoughts on it. The theme of our day is that third mark of mission, to tend, to respond to human need by loving service. And yet we all know that so often our energies are taken up by disputes and divisions amongst ourselves. In order to serve others, we need to address our internal issues so that we can give ourselves to the task of loving service in the name of Christ. That's, if you like, a negative way of putting it. A positive way of putting it is to say that when we serve others in the name of Christ together, that is so much more powerful as a witness than when we do it alone. And so attending to our unity as a communion is one of the chief tasks that we have, and particularly on ISCFO, it's one of the key tasks that we have. In fact, it is one of our mandates to deepen the communion of the churches of the Anglican Communion. And in our present 5-year term, we've been charged by 2 Secretary Generals, no less, to help discern the vocation of the Anglican Communion through careful theological research and writing. And to research and to describe what is our calling as a communion, and not just as a collection of autonomous independent churches. And that invites us to hold together Anglican ecclesiology, our doctrine of the church, and our ecumenical thinking at the same time. And of course we do this at a very challenging time for all churches, and in fact in our world, as Archbishop Justin described on Sunday and yesterday.
It's good to be here. We owe you ACC, and we stand before you in respect and humility. Thank you so much, Your Grace, my Archbishop Jackson, for sending me to IASCFO, whose main agenda is to sustain the unity of the Anglican Communion. What a tough task. And if it was the way we are quiet and silent outside there, we would say thanks be to God. And so what we can only say here is to say, so help us God. When Bishop Graham was testing the microphone, he reminded me of this clergy in Kenya who tested the public address system in the morning, and as an Anglican, he knew that he needed to apologize to the congregation. And so when he stood, he said, I want to apologize before we begin the service. Anglicans know it from the beginning. And they knew the priest was going to say, the Lord be with you. And the response was, and also with you. So he started by saying, there is something wrong with this microphone today. And people said, and also with you. So please, if there is anything, it's not as IASCFO was created in 2008 from three different bodies: the Inter-Anglican Standing Commission on Ecumenical Relations, the Inter-Anglican Theological and Doctrinal Commission, and the Windsor Continuation Group. These bodies were wisely combined together because doctrine and ecclesiology, faith and order, if you like, belong together. The faith of Christians flourishes in and is articulated by the church. Conversely, the unity of the church is based on her common profession of the one faith.
So in IASCFO, we do the same. We hold together these twin tasks of theological inquiry on behalf of the wider communion, with overseeing the ecumenical work of the communion. And in this session, we want to propose a new piece of work, which we are offering to do for the ACC and the instruments of communion, at the suggestion of the Secretary General, Bishop Anthony, and following several prompts from Archbishop Justin as well. And the task presented to us involves reflecting theologically on the calls of the Lambeth Conference and connecting them with some unresolved questions concerning structures of decision-making in the Anglican Communion.
We all spent a wonderful week in Kenya, my home country, last December. The members of the IASCFO had good, serious, and honest conversations across our own differences and disagreements, incorporating perspectives from Egypt, Kenya, West Indies, England, Canada, Wales, India, Brazil, the US, and South Korea. Two members from Southeast Asia sent their apologies, and they will join us in our next meeting. In our conversation, we quickly agreed that all Anglicans, indeed all Christians, are called by God to consider carefully and prayerfully what communion, koinonia, means. That is, to consider the nature of the fellowship we share in Jesus Christ and its implications. Returning to this old and ever new question, we hoped to be able to speak directly to some of the present impairments in the life of the Anglican Communion.
So given that we share a common baptism and a family history in our heritage as Anglicans, why is it that we sometimes find that our disagreements prevent us from sharing the Eucharist together? Given that Christians are called to patience and love and all the fruits of the Spirit, what if from time to time our disagreements seem to demand distance from one another for a while? Given that all Christians are called by God to walk together, synodos in Greek, a shared synodical life, must we always walk alongside each other or the same speed? Is it possible sometimes to walk together at a distance? And if it is, how do we do that well? Now, in some ways, these are troubling questions that we have to ask, but we have to ask them. Just as telling the truth to each other is a demand of the gospel, we don't need to fear that facing these questions can't lead to new light and life.
Anglicans have always sought to avoid as much as possible the tight centralization on the one hand and loose federation on the other. Because of this, it seems clear that we need to allow one another space to speak and think differently without letting go of our call by God to interdependent life, our call to communion. Within this framework, we can address the fractures of the last 2 decades.
Now, as we all know, several churches have absented themselves from the instruments of communion for over 15 years in protest at other churches amongst us who have changed their teaching and practice regarding marriage and sexuality. And some churches have faced what we call the consequences that excluded them from decisions about our polity or from representing the communion ecumenically. The Church of England's recently concluded General Synod raises even more difficult questions about these same subjects. Meanwhile, Anglicans continue to think about our structures and the instruments of communion.
Recalling that each instrument emerged at a particular time and that all have evolved and continue to change, it is not inappropriate to ask how the Lord may be leading the Anglicans in general to consider new ways and means of speaking to one another, as Archbishop Justin emphasized in his presidential address on Sunday. On all of these points, the Global South Fellowship of Anglican Churches has expressed a keen interest to encourage the communion to consider afresh questions of faith and order, with which IASCOFO is principally concerned.
Archbishop Justin has been reminding us that the instruments of communion have developed over time. They are never fixed in stone, they have evolved. And so, following the encouragement of both Bishop Anthony and Archbishop Justin, IASCOFO is turning to theological reflection on these challenges and proposes to initiate a beginning of a study that would report back about possible ways forward. And the short paper that we have submitted to this ACC sketches something of an apologia for the project. And it ends with reference to Archbishop Michael Ramsey's famous suggestion that Anglicans are inveterate Corinthians, clumsy and untidy, baffling neatness and logic. For we are sent, wrote Archbishop Ramsey, not to commend ourselves as the best type of Christianity, but rather by our brokenness to point to the universal church wherein all have died.
IASCOFO will want to reflect more on this Corinthian pattern of the church, a pattern, of course, not unique to Anglicanism. For now, it may be helpful to note just two fruitful themes in 1 Corinthians. First, listening. First, with St. Paul, we want to reaffirm our commitment to Christian love and listening, founded in our shared baptism, through which Christ makes us his members, just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body. So it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we are all baptized into one body, Jews or Greek, slaves all free, and we were all made to drink of the one Spirit. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 to 13.
But then alongside that commitment to unity, at the same time, Paul is able to express directly and honestly the divisions in the Corinthian church, calling a spade a spade. For some were following Paul, some were following Apollos, and some others Cephas. Their fundamental unity was endangered. And now, of course, Paul notes that Christ cannot be divided. He says that in 1 Corinthians 1:13. But even though Christ cannot be divided, his disciples can be. And at these times of difficulty, of division and contest, of differentiation by another name, St. Paul is able to somehow contain them within God's gracious providence. For this is how the community of the church wrestles with God for a blessing. We wrestle together on the way to a resolution. Through difficulties, God forms us in patience, love, and faithfulness. And as Paul puts it in chapter 11, only so will it become clear who among you are genuine, in that striking psychological insight. And that is, all are called to carry their own load. All are called to say yes and to leave everything to follow Jesus. And the church finally is called to a common profession of faith and shared order. And in this way, along a common path of formation and counsel, we learn to wait for one another, as Paul urges at the end of chapter 11, when he says, so that when we come together, it will not be for our condemnation.
And so as we follow this keenly and prayerfully, we find in St. Paul's advice to the Corinthians words that might encourage our Anglican family. A, to reaffirm our shared unity in Christ, who claims us in baptism and in faith. B, to name our divisions honestly and wisely and with charity or charitably. C, to press into a deeper, full communion with him and with one another by working patiently to overcome divisions in God's good time. Along the way, we need to avoid coercion and to give one another freedom to speak the truth in love and find ways to live and work together at a distance that are professional and perhaps varying. As Christians traveling along the pilgrim way to the New Jerusalem, it is not so surprising that one group travels at a different pace than another or takes a slightly different route. Some may feel others have wandered from the path altogether anyway, but we should still seek and pray to arrive at the one visible unity of the one church for which Anglicans have so long prayed and walked with many other families of Christians.
And so, building on the idea of good disagreement that Archbishop Justin has been calling us to in recent years, ASCFO is proposing to do some theological and historical and ecumenical work on what we are calling good differentiation. Now, we already have a level of differentiation among our communion with the emergence of GAFCON, the Global South Fellowship of Anglicans, and maybe more differentiation in the future. And yet so often in the past, such differentiation has happened in an ad hoc manner without much careful thought and has sometimes led to acrimonious relations. If we need to walk together at a distance sometimes to respect each other's conscience, how can we do this in as theologically responsible, charitable, and Christian way as we can? How can we do this well? Can we do good differentiation as opposed to bad differentiation? Are there models from history, from other churches? Are there lessons to be learnt from our ecumenical work that will help us with this task? This is what ASCFO has been asked and is offering to do some work on. Now, we've talked enough, and now with your help, we would like to do that very thing by asking you, the ACC, to start to think with us about the nature and shape of Anglican life together as we seek to follow Christ. And so, on the screen should come soon some questions. And we are inviting you, as we propose this project on good differentiation. If differentiation is a fact of life in our Anglican communion right now, if it's going to be a fact of life for a while, how do we do it well? How do we do it in as Christian and charitable a way as we possibly can? That's what we want to do some work on. And so what I'm suggesting we do now is for about maybe 15 minutes or so, you've got time on your tables we're going to read a couple of passages of Scripture, and in the light of those passages, discuss these questions, and then we'll have about 20 minutes for some questions for discussion in plenary as well. Now, have we got the passages coming up on the screen, or are they? There we are. So, Bishop Paul, do you want to read out that one for us? If we listen, you can't read that one. Okay, so I'll read this out, so that if we can listen prayerfully and carefully as we hear this text from St. Paul. Now I appeal to you, brothers and sisters, by the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you be in agreement, that there be no divisions among you, but that you may be knit together in the same mind and the same purpose. For it has been made clear to me by Chloe's people that there are quarrels among you, my brothers and sisters. What I mean is that each of you says, I belong to Paul, or I belong to Apollos, or I belong to Cephas, or I belong to Christ. Has Christ been divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? Let me go on to a later passage in 1 Corinthians 12. The body does not consist of one member, but of many. If the foot would say, because I'm not a hand, I don't belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. And if the ear would say, because I'm not an eye, I do not belong to the body, that would not make it any less a part of the body. If the whole body were an eye, Where would the hearing be? If the whole body were hearing, where would the sense of smell be? But as it is, God arranged the members of the body, each one of them as he chose. If all were a single member, where would the body be? As it is, there are many members and yet one body. The eye cannot say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. On the contrary, the members of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And those members of the body that we think less honorable, we clothe with greater honor, and our less respectable members are treated with greater respect, whereas our more respectable members do not need this. But God has so arranged the body, giving the greater honor to the inferior member, that there may be no dissension within the body, but the members may have the same care for one another. If one member suffers, all suffer together with it. If one member is honored, all rejoice together with it. So there are our three questions. What do those passages say to us about unity and diversity, about weakness and strength, or the weak and the strong? Can you think of examples of taking and giving space among friends and families and churches that have helpfully enabled new listening and deeper bonds of friendship? What potential risks does this involve? And then the last question, is some form of differentiation desirable or even inevitable in our current context? So can I urge you just to take the next 10-15 minutes to discuss those questions. You can start with any of them. You don't have to work your way through all of them, but turn to each other on the tables, talk about them, and we'll gather together again in about 15 minutes or so for some further discussion in plenary. Just another 2 or 3 minutes to discuss. We're not going for a full while. We're trying to get I'm aware there are some very important and deep conversations going on around the tables. We don't want to close those down. We simply want to open out the conversation so that everyone can hear different perspectives in the room. And we have around 20 minutes for that. And can I also just say an apology to the translators. I'm sorry if we were going too quickly earlier on. Hopefully we can go a little bit more slowly. An apology to those of you who were struggling to pick up the translation as well.
Thank you so much, my brother Graham. I grew up from a very large African family, and so the louder, the faster the voice, the better the services. So I apologize for being very fast, and my brother Graham, but we are now slowing down. We want to hear some feedbacks from the tables, table number 13, and table number 1,
Where's 13?
and table number 10.
Where's 13?
Let's hear some feedbacks from those tables, please.
Where are they? Where's you 13?
Good afternoon. I'm Canon Buchanan from the Episcopal Church, USA. So what our discussion focused on is the fact that the voice of the laity is not included in the decision-making bodies within the Anglican Communion. No one asked the laity when you are at Lambeth what issues would be the priority issues. No one asked the laity whether or not gender-based issues or LGBTQ issues were the priority. What is the way that our voices, who are the majority of the church, how are our voices being threaded into these decision-making bodies? What we are seeing is that our church is not a democracy, small d, that the voices of the majority are not being heard, that those who are in the hierarchy have instruments whereby they can discuss issues with each other, and there is no input. And so this becomes a matter of power, status, control, and those 16 issues that we looked at before, no one asked us which is the most important and which is the priority. So that is the main concern that we have. You're not surveying us. You're not having working group with us. You're not asking us. You are talking to yourselves and telling yourselves what the important issues are in the church, and the laity, who are the church, including yourselves, are not being heard.
Number 11 was it? Oh, sorry. You're 11.
Table number 10, please.
Is it table 10? It is you.
We were quite happy to let table 10 take the question, by the way, or table 11, should I say. First of all, it's a beautiful passage, Corinthians, and I suppose it's a beautiful model for all of us in terms of diversity within the church. I suppose, and when we looked at this question in light of previous conversations in relation to same-sex relationships, particularly with regard to the churches in Scotland, Canada, South Korea, and Ireland, and we shared those experiences, I suppose, among ourselves. We also related back to the history and some other social challenges that the church went through, and through which it retained unity, those of divorce and the treatment of marriage, and particularly people who were divorced seeking to be remarried. The relationship of the church to female leadership, we talked about that, and the challenges that has been for many within church, and yet we retained unity. And I think we just reflected on our own experiences within our own churches with regard to the current challenges in relation to sexuality. We didn't reach any conclusions, but we do recognize that this is a journey, as noted in Corinthians, and journeys are beautiful things in lots of ways, because it's a chance for us all to learn from ourselves, from each other, and share those experiences. So I think from our perspective, it's not that we reach any conclusions, but we just shared those experiences together. So thank you.
Table 1.
Hello everybody, I'm Senza from South Africa. We also didn't reach any conclusions, but our conversation flowed from one topic to the other. It began by us saying, when we approach the throne of heaven one day, there's no way God is going to say, well done, my good and faithful Anglican. He will say, well done, my good and faithful servants. And he will not differentiate between black or white, global south or north or Indian or black or white. But he will look at his church and his bride. And so we began by chatting around that and just saying, maybe the question should not be saying risks around what happens if we look to work with other, I'm going to call it denominations. Maybe it should be called opportunities. And maybe the question is not the right question. And a couple of examples were made to that point, and then we moved on to say maybe it is a risk. Because the conversation was flowing is to say the more we work together with different people, one of the dangers is that the more powerful will then suppress the cultures of those who are weaker in whatever sense and in whatever way. And so that's where our conversation ended, but we would love to continue the conversation.
Table 10. 11. Whoever you are.
So our table has always been forgotten. I think we are very far away. In our discussion, we looked at the analogy of the body in relation to the question of walking together, either in the same speed or sometimes can we walk at a distance from each other. And in our discussion, the analogy of the body, it is not possible for the body to be in two spaces at the same time. Because, you know, it is one body. The other analogy we looked at it in the analogy of the body is if we walk in different distances, the question will be, are we still walking in the same direction? Or one part has taken a deviation and taken a different turn. Coming back to the body, we realize it has many members of different function. The eye has a different function from the ear, the leg from the hand, the ear, the mouth from the eyes. But still there is a parts of the body that does not allow that body to function differently. For example, how about the respiratory system? What about the nervous system, which permeates the whole body? What about the blood system that gives power to every part of the body? So the question we are raising ourselves are, does the Anglican Communion understand her nerve system? Do we have one? Do we have a blood system that binds us and make the function flow together? Do we have one respiratory system that the breathing moves oxygen from every part of the body into every other part for the body to function? Or we want to concentrate on walking in distances that may allow us to be dismembered? And when the body is dismembered, will it still be one body? Those are the struggles we had at this table.
Table number 5, please.
Hands up, please. Hands up, table 5, please.
Table number 5, raise the
Over here,
hand.
yes, thank you.
Thank you.
I thought we'd escaped. We struggled with whether our diversity was of a different nature to that in 1 Corinthians, in that our present disagreements are about doctrinal issues, in a sense, of things, rather than about leadership. So that was a question that we kind of raised at this table. We explored the idea of times in family conflicts where people are given space, and recognized that, particularly in marriage situations, that always is at a huge risk, that once there is a separation, there is no guarantee that people will come back. We also raised the question of what are the limits of our diversity? Are there kind of railway tracks in which we accept diversity, and are there other things, for example, if I name one, I hope and pray would be true in this communion, that distinctions on race would never be an acceptable diversity in our communion, for example. So we struggled with the limits of diversity, and that's where we were struggling. Those are the things we struggled with, so thank you.
Thank you. Can I thank everybody who's spoken so far? Really helpful to get those perspectives, different aspects of the imagery of the body, the limits of the relationship between the kind of Corinthian disputes and our current ones, the different experiences around the communion, the idea that we are ultimately Christians, servants, rather than Anglicans. And the perspective about the laity was a really important point to make. Thank you so much for that. I'm conscious, as a Iaskafo, we're a small group. We happen to be two bishops presenting because we're the only ones on Iaskafo who happen to be here. We do have laity on that group. We have it's quite a wide-ranging group, but it's a really helpful reminder to us to make sure that voice of the laity, which of course is here in the ACC, but not always not in the other instruments, is heard in the bit of work that we do as well. So thank you so much for that really helpful comment. We've got, yeah. Open it out to anybody who wants to speak or ask a question at this point now.
Just a very small contribution. Would be much easier for me draft the solution, the good unity project, instead of the good differentiation project, because unity is what counts, not differentiation.
Thank you. Yeah. I guess it's a really good point about what we're aiming at is unity, not differentiation. I guess what we're trying to acknowledge is that differentiation may be a step that we have to go through in order to get to unity. So, yeah.
Andrew Atherstone from England. I'm really warming a lot to the potential of the project and picking up what Archbishop Justin said a couple of days ago about evolution and creativity and fresh thinking. As part of that fresh thinking, we need to think about the role, the dominance of the bishops in the communion. We've just heard that very helpfully from America. I think from an English perspective, we also need to think about the dominance of England in the communion, and what will that look like going forward. England always likes to think of itself as first. I mean, we're all equal, but the place of England is always the sort of first amongst the equals. Is that really appropriate in the new communion, or whatever shape it might be? So some work on that from your group would be appreciated.
Thank you. Yeah, that's a really helpful comment, because back to this, what does the Anglican communion look like in a post-colonial world?
Okay.
Thank you. Lots of hands. We're trying to get around them all.
My name is Joseph Bilal. One of the things that I'm just reflecting on, whether we actually listened very carefully to each other. It seems to me that in the Anglican communion, the degree of our listening to one another and making decisions is completely impaired in one way or the other. Because if we listen to one another and take decisions that affect the other simply because of my autonomy, then it means that we are actually even breaking down the communion rather than making it united and work together. So in which way could we be able, as Anglican communion, to listen to one another and also act on a way that it doesn't affect the other? Is one of the biggest struggles I have. Whether we can able to walk together in one phase or we will be walking differently is a big question.
Thank you. We've got 1, 2, 3, and that maybe doesn't matter much time as we've got. So one down here, Neil.
Yep, coming through. Hand up, please. Which question? Yeah, thank you.
If you can say your name and province, that would be great too.
Je m'appelle Mansita Sangui. Je suis de Yama, l'église anglicane de l'Angola et de Mozambique. En fait, en rapport à l'unité de l'église, nous savons tous que la charte de l'unité de l'église se trouve dans Jean 17. Là, Jésus-Christ implore le Père en disant que Père, comme vous et moi, en fait, nous avons été unis, j'aimerais que ce peuple, tel que moi je suis prêt pour partir auprès de toi, que ce peuple reste uni. C'est là pour dire que Jésus-Christ n'entend pas recevoir l'unité des membres de l'Église auprès de ses membres. Mais il entend recevoir cette unité auprès du Père lui-même. Donc cela veut dire nous pouvons nous battre, nous pouvons faire quoi que ce soit pour recevoir cette unité, mais c'est lui qui peut nous le donner, c'est Dieu lui-même en fait. J'ai dit et je vous remercie.
Thank you very much indeed. Just again a reminder of that unity is a gift of God to us. It's not something we create, but it is God's gift, the gift of the Father. Thank you so much. We've got two more hands over here.
Oh, thank you very much. This is the forgotten table. Sorry. I'm not going to say this in French. Our table is a very wonderful table. We had a ecumenical observer who was with us. We ended with a simple question. I said, if my sister from Canada came to my church in Congo, what element of unity will he find? And I can give the answer from our brother here. Say, you have the liturgy. That as soon as she enters my church, she will know exactly where we are as Anglicans, which will make it difficult. Yes, about the body, we ended with that good note of identifying some other elements of unity in the Anglican Communion. And the contribution of our ecumenical partner was very, very great and very important for me.
Thank you. Maybe one more, and then we need to break. Thank you.
Everyone, Ranjit Matthews from the Episcopal Church. I just want to lift up what Dr. Bilal said earlier. I think it's really about the quality of our listening, right? What is the quality of our listening? And if we look around this room, this is the beauty of our communion, the diversity, right? And any sort of unity should not be weaponized or seen as coercive. But if we can live and truly be who we are, and the quality of our listening could go deeper, I think that's the invitation and our vocation as the communion. But can we stay together to move into that, I think is the question.
Thank you so much. I'm conscious we've got to 3:30 and we need to draw to a close, but I'm conscious this is just the beginning of a conversation, and some of the conversations on your tables you may wish to continue. We have a resolution which will come to in the resolution session later on, which will you can see on the screen there, which will ask you as the ACC to welcome the proposal to explore these questions, and I ask you to do that. Affirm the importance of working together to the highest degree possible, asking any proposals that come out of this that impact the ACC constitution to be brought back to full discussion at the next ACC, and I ask UFO to proceed with this work and report back to the instruments of communion. And this discussion has been really helpful for us in guiding this project, if we're to do it, going forward. If you have other things you would like to say to us about this project, please do feel free to email into either myself or to the Anglican Communion Office, to Christopher, who is the Director of Unity, Faith and Order, Christopher Wells, or talk to me. I'm here till tomorrow morning, but please do find either Bishop Paul or myself or Christopher over coffee or tonight. But thank you so much for your help and wisdom this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bishop Graham, Bishop Paul, and Dr. Wells and Neil, for having this consultation and conversation with us about their project. As Bishop Graham has indicated, this conversation will continue. So if you do have time during the coffee break, you feel free to continue that conversation. Okay, now we break for coffee, and we'll come back in a half hour's time for the next session.